People who have seen something they could never explain. What was the thing? A tree fell in front of us while we were driving. It almost killed us. Moments later, a group of men dressed in nice clothes just happened to have chainsaws in their car. That was black and black tinted windows. They started cutting up the tree. We quickly turned around and said nope. I tried to tell myself that it was just Mormons who happened to have chainsaws in the back of their car. I called my mom the other day to see if she still remembers that incident, and she does. Short version. 14 years old. Pretending to sleep at a friend's house and instead walking around the city, Colorado Springs, Colorado, at around 3 a.m. And suddenly for about 2 to 3 minutes it's bright as day across the whole city. I could clearly see mountains probably 5 miles away. And then poof. Back to dark. There was no obvious source of the light. That was around 35 years ago. Still have no clue what it was. Edit. Surprised this post got any attention. Also amazed at how many others had very similar experiences. Agree with the feedback suggesting a meteorite is the most likely explanation. It was not a cloudy night, so I think electrical ground source bouncing off clouds is less likely. Those suggesting iridium satellites. This was mid to late 80s, so I don't think they launched yet. And yeah, there's a ton of military stuff in the area. NORAD, the Air Force Academy, Peterson AFB, and I think a few others were mentioned. I think these are less likely than a meteorite because of how far up and down the mountain range I could see. Also, folks mentioning a meteorite probably wouldn't last 2 to 3 minutes. I think my time perception could be off. I froze up and just stared at the basin of the city and the very prominent mountains for however long it was. It felt like a few minutes. But maybe it wasn't? The odd thing with any explanation is that the light source was clearly on my side of the Rocky Mountains. The whole Front Range was visible. So the source seems like it had to be from above. Yet I couldn't see any point of light in the sky where intuition says it had to be. Still, I suppose they have been nestled behind some geography that blocked my view but didn't block it casting light on the basin of the city, mountain range. That seems plausible. I fly helicopters for a living. I was working on a power line one year and was going back to our landing zone and noticed an opening in the trees, what appeared to be a leg. I came back and tried to get as low as I could into the clearing, thinking it was a person. It was a full-grown cow that had been completely skinned. There were no farms around and the animal didn't appear to be cut up in any way. I went back to the landing zone, picked up one of my ground crew members and flew back with him just so he could verify that I wasn't crazy. The flight back. We were both kind of in awe because we have no idea how that animal got to where it's at. Even more so that it had no skin on its entire body. It looked like a perfect cow sand skin. A voice sounding like my friend's sister calling out his name from a tree line in a park. Me and friend were walking home near the middle of the night. Both of us heard it. He was called out 3 times. I was standing on the seaside walkway with a bunch of other people watching the sunset. A red orb came speeding down the coastline at like 50 to 150 meters altitude. Didn't think much of it until it instantly stopped and speeded back the way it came until it was out of sight. No noise. Too low for a plane or helicopter, and wasn't a flare because it was flying fast. Stopped instantly and then flew back the way it came. Several people saw it, but this was before mobile phones with cameras were a mainstream thing. Was talking on the phone to my dad in the garden. About 15 years ago. Saw an orange light slowly come up over some trees behind my house, then take off straight up at a ridiculous speed. Stood there in silence, and so did he. Explained to him what I'd just seen, and he said he'd just seen the exact same thing. He was over 100 miles away in Manchester at the time. I live outside city limits. There are very few houses near my home and many tall bushes and trees around the house. There is a small mountain at some distance. The nights are very quiet and there is no street lights, so after dark, the only lights are the lights from my house and the moonlight. There are 2 trees a little far from my house that are standing close to one another. One night while I was outside my house with a flashlight doing something, I realized there was only one of those trees. I looked around that tree with my flashlight, but there was no sign of the other tree. Like it never existed. The next day I went there during daytime to see exactly what happened to the other tree, and they both were there just like I remembered. I looked around them and even climbed on them to see anything strange, but nothing was out of ordinary. One night, Years after high school and I'd gotten married. I had a vivid and very sad dream about the first boyfriend I ever really loved. We were 15 and 16. Broke up about 3 years later because he really got into drugs. I had this dream maybe 9 years after that. I dreamed I was walking down a crowded sidewalk in some big city and I bumped into him going the direction I just came from. He was crying and he asked me for help. I can't remember if the dream changed then or I woke up, but it was just that little snippet of seeing his face. It was so clear. I still remember how his beautiful blue eyes looked. I don't know why I waited a couple more years to call his mother and ask about him one day when I recalled that dream for some reason. But I did call her. It turns out he had died in a freak accident around the time I had that dream. He had a car in his garage that he was working on. He had climbed on the hood for some reason. To do something. And he fell. Broke his neck and it was fatal. Now I'm always sad and a little creeped out every time I think of that dream. Probably always will be. In college my wife, girlfriend at the time, had a nightmare that her pet iguana, at home with her father, had frozen to death after being left outside. She woke up sobbing and that woke me up. I calmed her down and told her it was just a dream. We both eventually got back to sleep. The next morning her father called to say that her pet iguana had been left outside overnight and had frozen to death. This wasn't a recurring dream or worry for her. This was the only time it happened. Neither of us can explain the events without the aid of religion or 1 in a trillion coincidence. 2 missing hours. I posted about it on another account. Setup. I used to be a home health aide for the disabled, elderly. I stayed overnights to help them get up, use the restroom, change, clean them, etc. I used to take care of a man named Mr. M. We kept an old large clock alarm that chimed every hour. Every 2 hours we'd roll Mr. M over and change his pads. We recorded everything that happened in a notebook by the clock. Story. It was a usual day until around 2 a.m. I heard the chimes ring, twice, wrote down that I was going in. Then went in. Wrote what I did, changed his pads, wrote the time I got done. Then went back to the kitchen where I sat every night, having my laptop set up to pass the time. About 15 minutes pass. And I hear the clock chime again. 4 times. I look at my computer, thinking the clock was wrong. And no. 4 a.m. I look at the notes. No new notes. I write that I'm going in. I go in to change Mr. M's pads. I walk in. And he looks at me and asks, "Weren't you just in here?" I said yay. Then went with changing his pads. They were dry. A rarity. I still have no idea what happened to those 2 hours. It was like 2 hours passed in 15 minutes. And 3 o'clock was skipped completely. I was watching a YouTube series at the time. And my video would have ended in that 2 hours. I have no idea to this day what the hell happened. To those suggesting a time change, DST. This happened December 11th, 2016. As a kid on rainy days, I would grab my umbrella and jacket and play around in the rain, collecting raindrops. When I was about 11, I was playing outside in my front yard one day. I decided to go into the sidewalk to catch a bit more rain. I then looked into the street. It was a foggy, rainy day. But I could have sworn I saw someone who looked exactly like me. Me being a kid, I panicked, ran inside for the rest of the rain. But I was still an idiot, so I never really told anyone. 'Cause I thought that they wouldn't believe me. Edit. Holy guacamole. Didn't know others had the same experience as me. Also, to clarify more, they didn't copy my movements like a mirror. Yes, we were both standing and the same height. But when I was running and turned around for a moment, they didn't really seem to move. They just stood there staring. Not seen but heard. I swear I keep hearing breathing in my fucking room in the middle of the night. Edit. Thanks for the upvotes. I only hear it every couple of months or so, haha. IDK, I think my room's haunted, or maybe I am going insane thinking face. Edit 2. Just read through the comments and replies saying some of you guys have heard it too. Glad I am not alone in this, haha, and yes, I will get a carbon monoxide detector soon. I worked as an under-butler in a large Scottish castle in the early 2000s. One night, I was the only person in the house, and decided to throw a load of laundry in before bed. I walked down to service hallway, into the ironing room, and from there to the washing machine room. I got my laundry in, and then started to leave. I turned the lights off in the washing machine room. and suddenly everything was black. The lights weren't on in the ironing room. My first thought was, it's weird that I didn't turn the lights on in here when I came in. But they aren't on, so obviously I didn't. The ironing room had huge ironing tables the size of snooker tables. And as I started to walk through, I kept bumping into them. After a couple of times of bumping into them, I was suddenly filled with a terrible, accompanied, watched, spine-tingling feeling that something was there and not to look toward the sewing room, another room that came off the ironing room. I fumbled my way through the ironing room, back to the service hall in a panic. The hall lights were on and everything was fine. That is the whole story. I didn't see anything. However, there are some problems. To this day, I am confident that I turned the lights on in the ironing room when I went in. It wasn't possible to move through the room without bumping into things a bunch of times. As my exit demonstrated, the light in the ironing room was controlled by a very large switch that made a loud clicking noise. I didn't hear it click off when I was in the washing room. In the days that followed, the family and the butler returned home, and I had forgotten about the entire incident. A week or so later, I suddenly remembered it happening, and said to the butler, "I've never heard of any ghost stories at the castle. Are there any?" He kind of dismissively said, "Oh, they say there is a white lady in the ballroom. And, room name redacted, is apparently haunted. But that's it. Oh, and they say the sewing room is haunted." I kind of gasped and told the butler the story. He seemed fascinated. He told the family, and a couple of them agreed that the laundry room was unsettling. I don't believe in ghosts, and think it was likely an unfortunately timed electrical fault and an overactive imagination. Still, I'll never forget how sudden and strong the feeling of a presence was when I was fumbling my way out of the ironing room. I was walking along a park sidewalk blowing off grass clippings. Got under some pine trees and through a break in the canopy, an 8 to 10 pound rock came tumbling out of the sky. Bounced and chipped the sidewalk and rolled down into a creek. Weirdest thing I've ever seen. I, 13 at the time, was about to go to bed. I was brushing my teeth in front of my bedroom window, staring into the dark, when I suddenly heard someone screaming outside. I stopped brushing so I could hear it better. Someone was screaming out my name. I sort of froze and kept listening. More voices joined, all screaming my name and laughing loudly. It was kind of like an audience at a sports game. It went on for about 5 minutes. When it stopped, I, in shock, went downstairs to my parents to ask them if they'd heard anything. It was impossible not to hear as it was very loud. They had not heard anything. I assume it was some sort of a hallucination. Still feel weird when I'm alone in my room late at night. In my early 20s I was home alone. I woke up to my cell phone ringing but missed the call. The phone number I missed the call from was my home phone number. I got up and found the cordless phone on the kitchen counter. I looked everywhere, but no one was in the house and the doors were all locked. When I was at university in my second year, we lived in a terraced house. I have a history of vivid, lucid dreams, and had just recently at this time experienced a couple episodes of sleep paralysis. One night I wake up, I think. Anyway, and I remember staring at the doorway completely frozen and seeing the shadows of 2 men there. They were whispering about taking me and discussing whether I was asleep. I remember hearing "Shish. Go back to sleep." It was completely fuzzy and dark, and I was in that very much blurred reality stage of not being able to tell if I was awake properly or not. I couldn't move at all, and chalked it up to sleep paralysis and went back to sleep. I wouldn't have thought twice about it, except the police knocked on our door that afternoon. I wasn't in. My housemates told me, and said our neighbor had had their house broken into that same night. The real kicker is that at the time our front door lock was broken, anyone could have come in and left without us knowing. To this day I will truly never know if it was a coincidentally bad day to have a nightmare, or a lucky escape. I'm pretty sure it was a dream. If there hadn't been the burglary the same night, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. The only other thing I wondered at the time was our housemate had a habit of not closing the broken front door properly. So 2 to 3 times a week at that time, if you got up in the middle of the night, the front door would be swinging wide open. Trust me, we were very annoyed at him for this, ha ha ha. Closing parenthesis. I wondered if the people who had broken in next door had happened to see our door open and figured they'd have a look and decided there was nothing in our ratty student house worth taking. and that some part of this had combined with my weird dream state to mix up some dream and some reality. It is also worth saying that I am an exceptionally light sleeper and woke up constantly in the night at this time in my life. Overall, I still think that dream is the most likely scenario. But truth is, I will never know for sure. And I figure the end result is the same either way ultimately. Super interesting hearing other stories of similar experiences too. My nephew was pointing at a picture on the wall saying, "Boo," and laughing. Then the picture fell onto the desk below it. How Roman Grosjean went through the barriers at Bahrain and came out alive. Edit link for those who haven't seen it. This incident happened to me when I was 10 years old. My friend and I were cycling. It was around 7:15. And it had gotten dark. There was a road where we usually cycled. But it was a dead end. There were bushes on one side and a wall with barbed wires. At the end of the road, there was a residential complex on the right side. And a small route led to the farms. The middle part of the road was all quiet and dark. My friend and I were just chatting and cycling when I heard a sound. I don't remember it well. But it seemed like a little girl weeping. Just as I was about to ask my friend, "Hey, did you hear that?" he shouted, "Run." When we reached the other side of the road where the residential complex was, I asked him, "What the heck, bro? What happened?" He was shivering in fear and said he saw a woman in the bushes with a big white eye. When some people appeared on the road, we quickly left. We were shivering with fear. And to this day, we don't know how to explain it. Actually, I still don't understand the concept of déjà vu. It happens to me about twice a year since I was around 18 years old. I'm 44. Just random places or experiences that I swear I have seen and been through before. It's so strange. I got sleep paralysis and then I was pulled off my bed. I was home alone. I couldn't move but I could see. And I didn't see anything. I don't go into that room anymore. Me and my brother saw light coming through a bricked-off vent in my house about 20 years ago. It was a powerful light, like there was a mini sun in there. Light has never come through it before or since, and we both still remember it. I once saw my neighbors bringing grocery in their house, but they still ask us for stuff. Shortly after my mother passed away, I was going through and organizing her belongings in her room. I was talking out loud as if I were talking to her. There were some boxes with family photo albums I'd been looking for that I hadn't been able to find, and it was really worrying me. I was sitting on the floor and said aloud, "Where did you leave those albums?" "Mom?" Very slowly. Her closet door opened on its own. A slow, creaking movement from nearly totally closed to halfway open. I was as terrified as I'd ever been in my life. I froze and didn't move. But I looked at exactly eye level and there was a cardboard box labeled, "Albums," in my mother's handwriting on the lower shelf of the closet. I am not a religious or even spiritual person. And I thought that there might be some imbalance in the hanging of the closet door. I went back to the door many times and tested it by wiggling it back and forth and leaving it in different positions, but it's never moved that way since. A drive that usually takes me less than 3 hours took me more than 4 once. I don't know how it happened. No traffic. Didn't take the wrong path. Didn't see anything strange in the road. Same speed as usual. Everything was normal until I noticed it was starting to get dark. Then checked the clock and freaked out. I don't know how to put this. But there was a period of time when I would get home from work late at night. During this time, I'd get out of my vehicle and head towards the front door. Obviously. But without fail. Nearly every night, I would look up at the stars without really knowing why. I would look at the moon for a long while with no thoughts in my head. Eventually I noticed a bright white light. Every night. At the same spot in the sky. A bright star? Probably. A distant planet? Could be. So during my little stargazing routine, I'd look for that bright star. One night it was gone. And ever since then I stopped feeling entranced by the night sky. Sometimes I miss that light in the sky. But most of the time I don't think of it. Never did find out what it may have been. I once showed Harrison Ford a car to see if he wanted to upgrade from his current one. I asked him what he was looking for. He gave me nothing but useless one-word responses. He told me, "I seem to have made you run a fool's errand," and walked away toward his car. I had a "fuck it" moment and said in a stern voice, "Well, how long have you had that one?" Referring to his current car. He stopped, turned around, and walked back to the car I was sitting in. Leaned into the passenger side with one hand on the seat and took off his glasses to reveal a surprised, almost worried face. As he said, 3 years. Why? I then realized as I was looking into the eyes of Han Solo from no more than 2 feet away and redirected my head to the steering wheel to talk nonsense about new button features. The part one don't understand is, when I looked back, he gave a smirk, almost a smile, as he slowly moved his sunglasses back over his eyes and turned around to his car without saying a word. I don't think I'll ever know if he smiled because he succeeded in flexing his fame by merely staring me in the eyes to make me nervous, or because for a second he thought I was actually able to help him without treating him differently for being famous but got noticeably nervous and fucked it up. It keeps me up sometimes. Image the situation. Me. 13 years old girl walking with my dog in fresh snow. Really fresh 5 centimeters of snow. No one around. I see big, really big, black dog. I look at my dog. My dog is terrified and trying to get home. We run home. I wait for 10 minutes and go check that dog. I was stupid. Yes. There are no dog footprints. None at all. On fresh snow. Only footprints of me and my dog. I checked all area. Nope. Nothing. It wasn't hallucination. My dog nearly peed when he saw that black gaint dog. I was staying the night with a cousin on his ranch, and in his front yard there was a basketball hoop on a homemade wall like concrete bricks stacked upwards. And we both to this day swear on God we saw what looked like a 8-foot-tall coyote standing up against the wall tugging on the hoop. We closed the blinds quick, and that was the night we established the existence of the ranch's very own cryptid. I think we called it like, Doom Dog, or some shit. We were 9 to 10. Not me. But my dad. When I was younger, my biological mom and her husband kidnapped me and took off to another state. My dad said that he was finally starting to accept that he may never see me again after nearly a year of searching. And then one day when he was on a walk, this little girl came up to him and asked, "Are you looking for a little girl?" He looked at her, confused, and she just turned around and pointed up the block at a group of kids playing, and said, "She's right there." He walked closer, past the girl, to try to get a better look, and saw me in the group. He turned around to figure out what the little girl's deal was. And she was just gone. Without a trace. Turns out my bio mom and her husband had come back to visit family for whatever reason. I used to call BS because the story is just so insane. But throughout the years, it's the one story of my dad's that never changed. Not one detail. He's told it so many times that I can recite it word for word. And he's always so fucking awestruck when he tells it. Like I can almost see him racking his brain, searching for the most logical explanation. I was approximately 2 to 3 when it happened. And I'm now 26. He still can't piece it all together to this day. When I was about 16, I was at a sleepover LAN party with some kids from my school. They were more of the sporty types. Sort of friends. But more so acquaintances. One of them wanted to go to the store and I went with them. It was night. Probably 9 or 10 p.m. This was in a very small town in New England, by the way. Anyway, we're driving. And this monkey cat looking creature just hops out of the woods and lands right in front of the car. We just stopped and froze. Then it hopped into the other side. And this was 2 total hops. Thing went far. We spent the rest of the night trying to figure out what animal that was. Anyone know? I was thinking about that the other day. But I never really talked to the kid in the first place and haven't seen him since high school. Edit. Had a really long tail. Thinking back, more like the head of a cat and the body of a monkey. It wasn't very large, but definitely not small. Light brown. When I was 18 years old, I was driving home from a friend's house with another friend. We were on the highway doing about 110 km/h, 70 miles per hour, and made this trip often. It's a big highway between 2 towns. So just fields either side. Something on 2 legs ran alongside my car. I saw it in the rear view mirror and out my side window. It was not a kangaroo. It was human-like. Had long arms and obviously extremely fast. My friend saw it too, and then it just went off the road back into the grass. Neither of us could explain it. I think I was 14 at the time. Living in a nice part of a very busy city. I woke up, had breakfast and waited for my parents to come downstairs. They didn't come. I looked for them but couldn't find them. Couldn't find my sisters either. I went outside and there was no one. Literally 0 people in an incredibly busy area on a weekend. I panicked fully. I looked everywhere for people but they just weren't there. I fully freaked out thinking everyone disappeared. I even checked if there was something on TV about. There was live TV with people, so I calmed a bit. Other people still existed. I think it was around afternoon when I stopped looking around and walked home. When I got home my parents and sister were luckily there. They insisted they were in and around the house all day and I even saw them at breakfast. I broke down crying because it was simply not true. To this day I swear people disappeared for half a day. After my breakdown we went for ice cream and my city was busy again. Hundreds of people doing their thing. I have no clue what the fuck happened but I feel gaslighted by life. I was in my 6th grade and going through the stored stuff, looking for old books. Letters. Scrapbooks. In the dilapidated part of my ancestral home. I swear I could see my great-great-grandfather's brother, whom I had seen only in old photos and had died very young, from outside the window yelling at me to get out. I got scared. Ran out and the whole roof came crashing down. Not seen. But felt, heard. Was 14. Sat at my computer picking, biting my lips. Which my dad always hated. Someone pulled my hair, as he always did to get me to stop. And said my name. My dad died when I was 13. UFO in Arizona. About 6 red lights in the sky. I thought they were transmission towers. But all of a sudden they scrambled back and forth across the sky and shot away into space. Defied the laws of our known physics. I've seen some stuff before, ghosty stuff. UFO stuff. That sort of thing. But the downright oddest thing was much smaller and still baffles me. A bunch of years back I was cooking in a bar. It was a solo kitchen shift with just a bartender and me for the whole night. When I closed my kitchen I would wrap up all the unused food with plastic wrap from a large heavy-duty roll of the stuff much bigger than you would buy for your kitchen at home. Now the roll itself was about 1.5 feet long. And about 5 inches wide and made of a heavy-duty type of cardboard which was held in place inside its box by plastic braces on either end. These braces effectively plugged both sides of the cardboard tube. One particular night I ran out of plastic and, after putting all food away and cleaning and turning everything off, I went to break down the empty plastic roll and box and such. No sooner had I pulled the tube out of the box, plastic braces still on, and set it aside, I began to hear a rattling inside the tube. Think about shaking a jar with a few beans in it. But cardboard and sitting perfectly still. I immediately thought it could only be some kind of agitated bug like a roach or something. We had never had any kind of infestation in that establishment and I would never allow such things in my kitchen. But that was all I could think it could be. I then very carefully removed the bracers to check inside the tube, which was completely empty. Very confused but brushing it off. I put the bracers back on and prepared to get the last of my trash together when I heard the rattling again. I knew the tube was empty. But there it was rattling like jumping beans on meth. I again carefully opened it all the way and set down the tube and 2 bracers. Nothing. I put the bracers back on and set it down, instant rattling. I called the bartender over and showed him. He immediately said, "There better not be a bug in there." So I very slowly opened it back up in front of him, still completely empty, and then put it back together and the rattling continued. In the end all we could do was shrug it off and chalk it up to a big, who FXX king knows. Sorry so long. But this has been bothering me for a long time. A few years ago I was staying in Alabama with a friend. One day I was driving down a steep road in the rain and fog. It wasn't quite night yet but it was getting dark. Within the blink of an eye there was a little girl on the side of the road walking towards my car and I thought I was about to hit her head on and she disappeared. I panicked and turned around and there was no one. I'll never forget it because my brain just can't make sense of it. I lived next to an RAF base. Lucky enough to be on the landing path. I swear on my life that I not only saw something come off a plane from the wheel well but heard it hit the ground. Cue me rounding everyone to look around. Only to find nothing and be called a bullshitter. Can't explain. Probably will get lost in the comments. I used to work as trauma cleanup and out of all the screwed up things I saw, there was one that bothered my coworker and I at the time and makes myself scratch my head still. This goes into a little bit of detail recalling suicide, so reader discretion is advised. We got a call one afternoon. You usually get a small accompanying description from a relative, a friend, a neighbor, just someone with secondary relations to who passed away rather than primary, especially in gruesome or otherwise sudden passings. So it was the neighbors that called on this one. Person who passed was a man verging into his 40s. An ex-veteran leaving behind his wife and younger than a teenager son. At least that's what we gathered from photos or portraits that were in the contaminated area. Story was that he had taken his wife and son to the movies following a wonderful dinner they had. Arrived home. He asked his wife to get his son to bed and in that time took his shotgun and did himself in the entry from his garage to his kitchen. No clue why someone, anyone, would do anything like that. Even having seen a lot and having some trauma of my own that I carry. And while I know everyone's pain and experiences are different, I couldn't fathom letting my partner go read my kid a story or making sure he brushes his teeth or whatever and blowing my brains out in that same period of time. In the same house. Directly downstairs from them. Anyway, not the point unfortunately. The point is that they needed help as the wife was inconsolable. Police had already arrived and did their investigation. And the neighbors were given the green from the wife to call whomever to handle it because, obviously, they couldn't and shouldn't be in the home after that until things got cleaned up and looking better, and until they've had time to go through their own grieving and such. So we get there and the contaminated area is like I described, but rather than like an entry, it's like a pantry. You have a garage, with a door. That leads through that door into a pantry, that has 2 doors. That leads from that second door into the house. And word does, and from the most affected area that we could see, he was in the pantry when it happened. Why this is all strange and makes me guess at a lot of what could have instead transpired there is because there is splash, a term that we'd use to signify an area where, through kinetic force, a fair amount of the contamination can be on the walls and ceiling, in the garage, pantry, and house interior. Having splash on multiple surfaces is fair and is seen a lot, but having it across 3 rooms, all separated by doors, with it also being on both sides of the doors, and a good amount of contaminants in the home and 3 feet around a corner. It's made me question what went on there and if it really was a man dealing with his trauma by ending it. Or something else altogether. Never spoke to the wife or went looking for an official police statement. It's better for your mental health if you try and keep yourself as separated as possible from the situation. But my coworker and I would talk about previous jobs sometimes by nicknames we'd give them and we'd recall that one under the name Houdini. I just don't know how. Even with the spread Buckshot puts out, you could get yourself across that many rooms and surfaces with one shot. It was either magic or the most terrible trick someone has ever pulled. I was 7 or 8 years old. My mom had put me to bed and went to my sister's room to do the same for her. I was tucked in with my head on my 2 pillows. Both my hands were wrapped up in the blankets because it was a cold night and we didn't have too much money to heat the home. Then, without warning, one of the pillows flew out from under my head toward the wall with an insane force. As if someone had violently pulled it out from under me. I turned over and there was nobody there. There's no way someone could have pushed it and I was facing the direction it would have been pulled from. I ran to my sister's room to hug my mom and ask her what on earth happened. She dismissed it and told me to go back to bed. Naturally I stayed up the whole rest of the night long. I still can't work out the physics of what happened to this day. In my old townhouse, the bedrooms had L-shaped door handles. I lived alone and it was a 2-story townhouse with the bedrooms upstairs. Had multiple nights where I'd be laying in bed watching YouTube videos on my iPad, when my door handle would twist and the door would slowly open. The first time, I thought someone broke in. Each subsequent time, I'd go through the townhouse and no one was there. The hallway light, which was also the stair light, had a switch at the bottom of the stairs and top that controlled the same light. Multiple times while in bed, the light would turn on. So I'd get up, do a search of the entire townhouse. Nothing there. Then the TV would turn on in the living room at some point. And I'd wake up and walk downstairs to the TV being on. This went on for months and I eventually moved. Nothing like this occurs in my current apartment. But could never explain what was happening. A giant footstep on the ground. Human foot shaped, but twice the size of the largest human foot you can think of. Might have been a prank, or a fetish thing. I do not judge lol. But I don't understand why someone would leave a footprint like that anywhere. I was visiting home. And my mom, my dad, and I decided to go to my maternal grandfather's grave to pay our respects. We have a tradition where for the first 10 years after a person's death, a cross has to stay over their grave. Otherwise the person might have a hard time crossing to whatever place comes after you die. He's been dead for 7 years. So my dad checked that the cross was sturdy and didn't need to be propped up or anything. We all checked it. It was definitely not going anywhere. About a week later, we had a windstorm. And after that, I started waking up in the middle of the night because I felt like someone was shaking me awake. This kept up for almost 2 weeks before I had a dream that my grandfather was sitting on the edge of my bed and he asked me to go to his grave and fix the cross because it had fallen. I told my parents about this and we all had a laugh about it. The dreams kept up though. At a disconcerting frequency because I was starting to be exhausted all the time from a lack of sleep. My dad and I, on a whim, went back to my grandfather's grave. Lo and behold, the cross had been knocked down. Gatekeeper said it probably got knocked down in the storm. We picked it up and I stopped seeing my grandfather in my dreams. My ex-boyfriend is a diagnosed schizophrenic and he often told me about the things, people he saw and heard. One summer, on several late nights, he kept seeing a big, dark creature in the middle of the road on the way to drop me off home. He'd stop the car in a panic and wake me up. I'd always fall asleep on the way home, and tried to get me to see this creature. I never saw anything so I told him it was probably his schizophrenia. Well, on one night I stayed awake on the drive home and I saw the damn creature in the road. It had the body of a huge bear. Long horse-like legs. It didn't seem to have a neck. It was blacker than night. And had a glowing white Cheshire grin. I said, "What the fuck is that?" And my boyfriend said, "See? I've been trying to tell you." We watched it cross the road and disappear in thin air. That was the last time he and I ever saw the thing. This was about 10 years ago. Here's a link to a post I made on r/paranormal a couple of years ago. Boy in the woods. This happened to me when I was a teenager. I think it was the spring of 1998 when I was 14. My Boy Scout troop went hiking in the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. I grew up in a very small town in Tennessee and the boys in my troop were people I'd known my whole life and we were all very close and knew each other very well and trusted each other. We'd been hiking for 5 days or so and it was miserable. It rained every day and we were all exhausted and sore and hungry and covered with blisters. The adults realized we'd bitten off more than we could chew in trying to hike a 60-mile trail. Especially with the awful weather. So we'd changed course and gotten off the trail to spend the night in a drive-in campground. The kind of place with hookups for RVs and picnic tables and fire pits, grills and a central bathhouse with showers and toilets. It was in a very remote area far from a town or a house. There may have been a few other small groups there, but if there were we never interacted with or saw any of them. We were all filthy and wet and thus very excited about taking a hot shower. It was dark and we'd finished dinner. A group of 5 of my friends including my friend Jeremy, who, like everyone else in our group, I had known since we were babies, headed up to the bathhouse which was maybe a quarter-mile walk through the pitch-dark woods up a worn-down gravel walking trail. I stayed behind to clean up and after 10 or 15 minutes followed them by myself. I had a weak little flashlight, the old incandescent kind, pre-LED. I remember the woods were totally silent. When I got about halfway to the bathhouse, I could see the light from it off in the distance through the woods. I heard a noise to my left and I looked over and saw my friend Jeremy standing by an old-school manual water pump about 20 feet off the trail. The kind of pump where you raise and lower a handle to pump water up from a well. There was a strange light around him like the moon had come out from behind the clouds. I was startled to see him there by himself in the woods off the trail. I asked him if he was already done with his shower. He seemed kind of sad and he said, "Yeah, it's all yours." I said okay and didn't think much of it until I got to the bathhouse. When I walked in the door my friends were all in there and I heard Jeremy talking from in the shower. All the blood drained out of my head and all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I had to sit down before I passed out. My friends were freaked out and wanted to know what was wrong. I told them what had happened. They nervously made jokes about how I must have been smoking pot. This was long before any of us had experimented with any mind-altering substances, but I could tell they believed me. Like I said, we'd known each other forever and knew when one of us was exaggerating or playing a joke. We all waited together until everyone was finished showering and brushing teeth and whatnot, and then walked back together in total silence. When we got to the spot I had seen whoever, he was gone without a trace. The water pump was there though. No one had noticed it before because it was a ways off the trail and obviously not in use. We got back to our campsite and went to bed freaked out. I remember not sleeping much that night. In all the years since then I've never been able to figure out what happened. Was there a random teenage boy in the woods who looked just like my friend? Unlikely. Did I hallucinate it? Also unlikely. Who's to say? Nice try. Whoever is running this simulation. Trying to fix low-hanging fruit, bugs. Good job. One time my grandparents were driving me home from Mexico around 1 a.m. We were approaching a bridge. IDK if my eyes were deceiving me, but I think I saw a man hanging on the side of the bridge. Hanging with his hands, not a rope around neck. I went to a friend who was a psychic. Yeah, I know. I joked about her skills with her all the time. But when my birth father passed away, I went to her. I had not spoken much about my father. Posted about him. Nor had she met him. He didn't live nearby. His obituary was simple with bare details. And he did not have an online presence. What she said to me were details no one knew. And I mean details. She said phrases only he would use in anger. She said it in the same tone it was frighteningly eerie. It made me a believer in her. She called me up one evening to speak to my husband. His mother had a message for him. I passed the phone over. I never heard the conversation. But it shook him. He didn't tell me much. But again, things no one knew. I still joke around about her skills. But respectfully. When I was approximately 19 or 20 and first living on my own, I woke up in the middle of the night once to a pitch black room. But realized I could see as if everything in my room was subtly outlined in a reddish glow. I closed my eyes and could still see the exact same thing. I then covered my eyes with my hands. But could still see. I even got up and tested it by walking around my house with my eyes closed and was able to navigate around all obstacles and even see things like cups on the counters and able to pick them up without missing them. After a little bit of this, I turned on the light to confirm everything was where it was. And when I turned the lights back off, the effect was gone. Overall it lasted about 10 minutes and has never happened again. My best guess is that I was still half dreaming and my brain was just able to very accurately represent my memory of where everything was. But even if that's the case, I'm very impressed with my brain's half-asleep ability to form a full 3D representation of my environment as I'm moving and manipulating small objects. Either that, or I discovered a latent superpower. That I closed my eyes and had my head in my hands and saw a round object coming towards me in my own dark light, brain gray, Eigengrau, whatever is called, and I startled and opened my eyes and saw a volleyball ball heading towards me. Which was then blocked by my classmate. I don't know how it is possible and I didn't have it again. However, I still think about this incident from time to time. There's an old closed-down road through a bunch of fields around the corner from my house. Me and my girlfriend were walking the dogs there one night at around 11 p.m. because we wanted to look at the stars. As we passed through the railings at the entrance, we both noticed someone coming out from deep in the bushes to the left of the road. Only visible as it was full white and almost reflecting, glowing from head to toe. Even though it was pitch black with no lights anywhere near. That's why we go there to see the stars. At first I assumed it must have been a cyclist as it appeared to be literally gliding up the road, which is a very steep hill, with no movement other than forward. No head bobbing from walking. But at the same time no movement in the legs, and this thing was dead silent. It was close enough to hear if it was a bike. The dogs were barking like crazy, but we just kept walking in silence. I don't know why I assume we were almost in shock. As it disappeared around the corner, my girlfriend turned to me and said, "Did you just see that?" I replied I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to scare you. We still don't know what it was, but I know for certain it made no sound coming out from the bushes and didn't appear to be dragging a bike through. It was just literally gliding or floating. I didn't realize until after that the reason the road was closed was because it was the most deadly road in my town for collisions, so they built a new one and closed it down. Still creeps me out to think about it possibly being someone who lost their life on that road. But I am still in denial, trying to refuse to believe it. I still tell my girlfriend it must have been a cyclist just so she will still come for walks through there with me. But I know, and so does she, it was not. One summer night, I was out on the balcony with 2 friends. Smoking a joint. High as fuck and watching the sky. And #X200B. Suddenly we see multiple bright dots. All in one straight line. Like 12 dots or something, completely straight. We were absolutely freaking out what the fuck that was, and just out of nothing, they fucking disappeared. And #X200B. Next day I looked it up and it was fucking Starlink satellites. Elon Musk fucking bamboozled me, this rich hobo. When I was a little kid I had a very small rock collection. In all reality it was just a little glass jar full of those polished rocks you get at museums. Anyway, I would just take the rocks out and look at them every so often. So I was pretty familiar with my little set of rocks. One day, I dumped out my jar. And I found 2 solid black rocks that I had never seen before. I was certain that I would have remembered getting them because they were so cool. I asked my parents and they didn't know where they came from either. Not the craziest story. But I still wonder about that sometimes. One night I was skating home. But wanted to smoke a bowl before getting there, so one stopped at the business strip that's right by my apartments. While I am packing my bowl, a car pulls into the parking lot and I am looking but doing no thing. I see a person get off the car in front of the building across the parking lot. The car leaves and the person stands in front of the building doing nothing. I keep casually glancing over, but I notice that this person is not moving at all. It was kinda creepy, so at this point I stop what I am doing and I am looking, trying to focus my vision to see what they're doing, but I can only see the person's shadow standing right across from me in the dark. I haven't even smoked my bowl because the fact that this man appeared to be looking straight at me annoyed me. I continue staring for another 10 seconds or so and I notice him starting to move in very unusual and distorted movements. Especially the arms and the torso. I start getting this very uneasy feeling, yet I can't keep my eyes off the shadow. I stare to make sure my eyes are not playing tricks on me because there is no way. But I clearly see this humanoid shadow moving very oddly. I don't take my eyes off it, but immediately put everything back in my backpack and freaking take off as fast as possible. It was the strangest thing. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like. If you would like to see more content like this in the future, subscribe and turn on notifications to be notified about future videos. Now check out one of these interesting videos.